All right, so we're COMP391, and this is week 2, lesson 2, part 4, right, of the video series. And I want to kind of continue with what we were talking about last time around gaming. We're almost done this whole initial history of gaming, that kind of thing, platforming, different kind of things. We're almost done, and then we're going to get right into Blender. I would like to try and not split halfway, but kind of shoot through some of these PowerPoint presentations or PowerPoint slides a little bit quicker. By the way, I have put the PowerPoint presentation up online in a PDF format. So if you, for reference, for your tests or anything like that, when we talk about some of the history of gaming and so on, it's there for you. Okay, and I think we were slide 82, if I'm not wrong, where we left off last time, way up here. Yes, we talked about tabletop games like Risk and all that kind of stuff last time. That was a big kind of genre. Playing Risk, playing pen and paper type games like Dungeons and Dragons, and I kind of revealed to you that I guess I'm a bit of a nerd, and I used to play Dungeons and Dragons a little bit more. Some other kind of sci-fi games like Traveler and those kind of things, and again, a lot of those games are the basis for modern role-playing games today, the tabletop stuff, right? And the reason for that is because this is what we had back then. We didn't have interactive kind of role-playing games as we do now, right? Even today, if you want to be honest, when we talk about role-playing games, the interactivity and the role-playing aspect of the games is still pretty minimal, right? I think they're getting better, but imagine if one day we have a true dungeon master. They have them today, but a true dungeon master who's when you're playing the game, you get somebody who's like, producing story elements. A person who's producing story elements, not the computer. Yeah.
Neverwhere Nights actually did that.
They did that. That's online. The online piece, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was good.
Yeah,
it was actually
really
good because it actually produced almost like a different gaming and a kind of a experience every time.
Yeah, they didn't continue with that.
It was expensive. It's an expensive model. You have to actually hire a GM, right? A game master.
Fair enough. But they didn't have.
Yeah.
Like you'd have a player GM, so people
Right.
would make their own servers.
Right.
Using the DM client.
That's the whole idea, right? So but some part of it is when you actually have a live environment with there's a live person doing it. It's hard, and also managing multiple players, like 20 players, that's hard, right? One person to manage 20 players is really bloody hard. That's why you need a bit of help from the AI and all that, right? And there was a little bit of spawning, like you can kind of create an environment where it spawns for you, and so that all that kind of stuff happens. And I think what they're going to get to, it'd be great if they had a game where, in order for you to play, you play the role of a player or GM, right? Imagine that. So you kind of log in. Which kind of player would you like to be, a GM or a player? Okay, fine. You make your own campaign, right? And then what you do is when you make your own campaign, it's saved on the server, right? And then you can choose spawning areas for different monsters and so on, that kind of thing. And then maybe other players can join in, and they can have fun, almost like a real desktop, tabletop role-playing game like they have today, right? Now, they don't have that right now. They're getting closer and closer to it, but they're not quite there yet. And it's the technology to support that whole aspect of desktop role-playing that they don't have going yet.
There was a couple of games which switch between
Player and GM?
And dungeon. Like one person designs the defense system and the other person tries to
go through it. But imagine if it was live. So now I'm the dungeon master. You log into my server, the game. I subscribe just like you do to the server, right? But my role is a dungeon master. I'm going to make sure that the creature that comes against you and that thing makes sense for the campaign that I'm building. And I'm building out the story elements and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but in
Right.
this kind, it's very hard to keep balance.
That's correct.
Game masters and players.
It's hard.
And,
It's hard.
Also, game master requires some skills.
That's right. So then there should be tutorials. There should be some other things involved how to do that. I believe there's going to be, I'll be honest with you, a demand for that kind of game story element. Why? Because AIs today, at least today, can't produce that kind of flexible interactive storytelling that you can do as people, right? Not yet, anyway. So we'll see. I mean, and then they create quests and everything else, but the quest is almost like it's a fixed quest. You go there, you fight your stuff, and everything's cool. But what if, you want to make it challenging? You get a couple players that are super powered characters, right? And now you want to kind of put up a challenge equal up to their level, right? and maybe add some other story elements in there or whatever. It could be cool if there's some kind of gaming system that allows you to do that, and then it kind of creates almost that same interesting environment. Yeah.
Neverwinter Nights actually did exactly that.
Yeah.
Word for word what you're describing.
Exactly. Yeah, but it just didn't. They couldn't maintain it. It was hard, right?
Well, like 'cause it was like the players, like the community was the one supporting the server, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't like a BioWare hired GM.
And that's the problem. That's the problem. They need someone that's your job, right? Imagine if it's just you work in the morning, get in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, you start off. Okay, it's GMing today. That's what I do.
That'd be a great
Right.
job.
It's going to be there. Just like social engineers. There's a social engineer today. If you go to a website and you have a person who's answering Twitter and all that kind of stuff, that's a job today to answer Twitter, right? Or to create Twitter requests and so on. It's part of the marketing department, if you will, right? I think tomorrow there's going to be so much, I don't know if you want to call it demand for gaming. There's going to be more of these, and they do exist today, by the way. I'm not making this up. This isn't new. I didn't pop this out of my head, right? This is something that actually exists today. It's just not as much in demand. It's not something that's out there, right? And it has to be something that works, cool, something cool that's going to be like, people like to play, right? Because remember, you have to have a guy or a girl, or maybe a team, right, of people that can create that story element that can kind of go against the players more interactively than just a machine. All right, time interval. Again, I think when we look at time intervals, things like you have this limited time frame as an example, and there's different kinds. There's term-based, there's real-time, and time-limited. We'll talk about that. Term-based games, I mean, we play that all the time. If you play Monopoly, that's a term-based game. Who's never played Monopoly? It's okay if you haven't. You never played Monopoly? It's okay, because culturally, some people just don't, right? Do you ever play any other turn-based game, like cards? You ever play cards? Anything, any kind of turn-based game where you have a turn, chess. Turn-based games. These are all turn-based games, right? Where I take my turn, you take your turn, right? That's a turn-based game. It's the same thing when you play Warhammer 40K, right? If you play a tabletop game like Warhammer 40K, you have models, you have miniatures, and I got my turn, I'm going to fire at you and kill you, and you got your turn to fire back at me and kill me. And each turn sometimes has individual phases. I have my firing phase, I have my movement phase, I have my recovery phase, different kind of phases depending on what it is, right? So turn-based type of games are the ones they're very popular still out there, both from a video game perspective and from a tabletop game perspective, right? And again, the classic games would be, board games or card games or chess games, those kind of things that are out there today. Basically, player versus player or player versus the machine this is a very popular genre. Another one would be pool. That's a turn-based game. You take your turn, I take my turn, right? Real-time game, it's like, it says it's the opposite of a turn-based game because basically things are happening in real time, right? So think about a real-time game where I'm in this scenario, I'm playing a first-person shooter, and now it's real time. No one's taking a turn here. Everyone's working at the same time. Everyone's working simultaneously, just like with the game we're talking about here, this fantasy role-playing game that we're talking about in our head, that with players and GMs. It's real time, right? This is the kind of stuff we want to do. From a tabletop perspective, it's always we play turn-based type of role-playing games. That's turn-based. It's usually not in real time because I have initiative. I go first, then you go, then he goes, then the creatures go, then it's back to me, right? Everyone goes in a specific order of play, right? Real time, there is no order of play. Whoever's first, whoever's fastest, whoever's the best, they go first, they kill you, right? Or they win, maybe it's a capture the flag, or maybe it's a type of game that's a puzzle type game. We start at the same time and it's real time. A good example of this would be physical games that are like soccer, those kind of games. And there's a lot of sports simulation types of games out there that are played in real time. Time limited type of games, again, sometimes you only have a specific time frame. And then basically, even though it says chess, we take turns. I play, then you play, but you only have a time frame to play it, and then your turn's over, right? Even if you play something like if you're playing a game, I'm trying to think of one that's more of a role-playing game or some kind of game that you have a limited time frame. Typically, turn-based games, there's unlimited time. You take as much time as you want, typically, right? And that's really annoying. Imagine if you're playing Monopoly and the guy, or cards, and the guy's just taking his time, right? Like a long time. People can go, hey, guy, come on, hurry up, man. I don't have all night to play. Make a decision. Make your choice, right? But sometimes you have time-limited type games. Like, for example, if you play competitive chess or something like that, right? You know, you've got 2 minutes to make a move or else you forfeit your move. That's it. Then the other guy makes his move, right? And, you know, you can't press the buzzer. Bam, you press the buzzer, now it's your turn. Okay, you're done? Bam, you press the buzzer, now it's my turn. And then you keep going back and forth. It's a time-based or a time-limited kind of game. Another really good example of that would be boxing, where you have like 3 minutes, right? So, or 2 to 3 minutes to play, to actually do your boxing. I'm a big martial arts fan, and for us, even at black belt level, 3 minutes is a lifetime, right? You're sweating, you're in the ring, and basically you want this your bout to end as fast as possible, so you don't get your teeth knocked out, right? So it's a really thing. 3 minutes. Thank God they limit it to 3 minutes, especially from an amateur perspective. Let's talk about player modes a little bit. So again, we're talking about the differences between single player and multiplayer, right? We're talking about all these things. The reason why the book that we're using is designed for all this is to give you an idea is, if I was going to design a game, what are all the elements of the type of games? These are almost like the business requirements, if you will. So when you make a game, you sit there and go, well, what kind of game are we making? Right, we're making a multiplayer game. Hopefully you're making a multiplayer game these days. Are you making a single player game, like so player versus a computer? What kind of game? Is it turn-based? Is it strategy? Is it real-time? What is it, right? These are the kinds of games that we're talking about. So you need to understand this kind of stuff, and that's why we're speaking about it here from a theory perspective. So there's classic single-player game. This is kind of the first games they always came out with. You against the machine, typically, right? Player versus AI, right? Space Invaders was one of the first games. You know, you have your invaders coming down. You have some defensive blocks that you have to kind of run around. You shoot your missiles, you know, at the invaders, and you go to the next level when you've cleared the screen, and you keep doing that. Single player game, right? And many other kinds of single player game modes out there. For example, even in today's role playing games and first person shooter games with a campaign element, you have to get to a checkpoint, right? You're playing the game. You get to the checkpoint, bang, you're at the checkpoint, now you can continue on to the next piece, right? And that checkpoint's left behind. You've accomplished a milestone of that story element when you get to that piece of the game. Single player mode. Again, still largely popular, especially for people who don't like to be social, right? If you're not a social gamer, right, and many of us are not, or you just want to get home from work or school and chill out a little bit and play on your own and play the campaign and finish the game, which might take you X number of hours, especially if you get a brand new game out there, you know, you want to finish the game off like in 80 hours or 60 hours or 30 hours or whatever it's going to be to take for the game, then this kind of single player campaign mode is a favorite. Here's an example of that, of a kind of solitaire game that they put in the book. 2-player mode, all right, almost like a head-to-head mode. It's not really player versus player because it's a limited amount of people that can play against you. There's still this kind of play mode, if you will, is still wildly popular with things like handheld devices like tablet computers, where you set up you know, almost an arena. You're waiting for a player to join. They join in, and then it's you and them, right? And it's still, you know, a network type of game that you're playing with random players, but it's still only 2 players. Or if you're playing a tablet computer with something that's, you know, kind of local to you, someone who's playing next to you. So you're in the same room as I am, and you log into your game, I log into the same game. We're playing, it's almost like a little LAN party, but it's only 2 players. Again, not as popular these days as multiplayer. Once we go beyond, we've gone beyond just a 2-player head-to-head type game. Although there are those kind of games, especially if you're playing card games. Like, for example, online card games like online Magic the Gathering, if you're playing that kind of thing, right? That's still quite a popular game. I know Hearthstone, is it only player versus player? Yeah, so there's a head-to-head game that's wildly popular nowadays, Hearthstone, right? So between those 2 games, those are 2 good examples of, I would say, you know, games where you're playing one against the other. Again, other kind of games, sports-type games are good examples of player versus player. But again, you can also play player versus computer on that one. And I've kind of covered this. Double Dragon fighting games. That's another. This is a classic 2-player mode game that existed back in the day. There were still quite a few fighting games you can play today that are just player versus player. Not as fun though, for some reason. It's becoming less and less fun to play, like, head to head, as opposed to play multiple player. So here's one, local multiplayer, where you're going to play multiplayer, but it's only in your local area network, right? Almost like this idea of a LAN party, right? Where you kind of get together, everyone's in the local network, and then you can play against people you can actually see. Everyone has their own UI, but you can hide elements from the other player. So if you and I are playing together, I can have my screen, you have your screen. You don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what you're doing, but we're not playing head to head. I've got my own machine. That was wildly popular in the 90s and in the early 2000s, where we had these kind of, like I said to you before, I think last week we talked about, playing at work. Playing Doom or some kind of crazy thing at work was crazy, and you got fired for it, but people did it all the time. And here's a good example of that. Here's local player mode as well, local multiplayer. But I kind of see this as a head-to-head kind of idea, right? Because you're still playing within the same screen. Even this is still playing within the same screen. I like to think of local multiplayer as having your own device. Like a good example of that would be 2 Xboxes in the same house, right? Right. That would be almost like you're playing on the LAN, but you're playing here. You're playing local. We've done that before too. I have an Xbox. My son had an Xbox. He was downstairs. I was upstairs, and he was kicking my ass regularly, right? Because he's better at it than I am, right? Talked about that a little bit. Where land-based multiplayer would be this again. They've got an example here of Fragapalooza back in the early 2000s and in the mid 2000s. That was a big thing back then. This idea of a LAN party. They're going to do the same thing tomorrow at Gaming Enthusiasts Live here in Toronto. Same idea is going to happen. They're going to have a big LAN party where you frag everybody. There's going to be different kind of games, and whoever's left out, the one that's left standing is going to win the prize, right? Online multiplayer, of course, is becoming the main thing, right? It's not becoming. It is the main thing, right? You sign up, and that's the big draw now. Playing, massively online multiplayer kind of games is the way to go, right? I mean, if you're going to create a game today, this is the model that makes the most money, right? Although most, you might see even things like Age of Conan. That was a game that came out fairly recently, or even Star Wars: The Old Republic. A bunch of those games that came out that had all these big release dates. Everyone was like super pumped that they came out, and then they had a free model eventually, where you can play free up to level 9, up to level 10, and then if you want to go on, you got to pay, right? It's almost like they gotta give you the drugs, right? And when they addicted you, right, then they want you to pay for the drugs afterwards, right? It kind of worked. It was a working model, right? And that's what happens now. You can play World of Warcraft free right now up to a certain level to addict you, and then afterwards you want to pay every month, right? You have to do the subscription model. And it works because, for a couple of reasons, people kind of get into the game. They have to understand what the game is. Some people don't like the game, so then you're not kind of tied into it. So there's no buyer's remorse. Well, now I have a subscription, but I really don't want to play, kind of thing. So, I feel bad I subscribed, and there's this whole problem they had from a billing perspective, right? And so this is the way the marketing model has changed. We'll talk about this again as we go into like marketing your game, right? So again, different online modes. Again, to me, the most popular one would be World of Warcraft. So again, from a section summary perspective, which is good, we kind of ended a little bit. We finally finished this piece off. We talked about different kinds of platforms. We talked about time intervals. We talked about player modes. And then difference of why different platforms, intervals, and modes affect your choices for game design, right? The idea here is when you create your business requirements for your game, whatever those business requirements are, you say, well, these are the reasons why I want this stuff to happen. I want these elements in my game. It's going to affect your design, right? And that's going to affect the way we develop, right? Because at the end of the day, we're developers on the developer side, right? So before we program our first piece of code, before we bring in one asset, we want to understand from a design perspective what type of game we're making. And that's it for this section.